The Idaho Pasture pig is probably the newest breed of any animal that we've covered on this channel. Compared to the history usually attached to the stars of our show, the Idahos are practically babies. But that's exactly what makes them so fascinating. The fact that they are so new means that they were cultivated with modern information, science, and communication to steamroll their debut into the world. The process of breeding a brand new breed can take years, even generations. But with the modern age to give them that extra push, the Idaho just raced to the finish line, and they exploded onto the scene. In 20 years, they've become the pig of choice for homesteads and small farms across America, and with good reason. But you know the drill? Let's start at the beginning, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritties of these fascinating pigs. It all starts with Shelley and Gary Farris. The couple lived on a farm in Idaho. Gary had a soft spot for the tiny koonie pigs from New Zealand, and his intention was always to keep them as pets. But Shelley had other ideas. She wanted to become self-sufficient and to move away from the antibiotics and processed foods that were in the stores. She wanted to keep pigs for their produce, and she wanted to have the most natural pigs, just like they were 100 years ago before mega manufacturing and all of the chemicals that came with it took over. But they had two problems. The koonie was adorable, and Gary was smitten with them, but it was just too small and grew too slowly to serve their production needs. The other breeds were too big, and they didn't have the convenience that pasture pigs had of just being raised on grasses and grazing alone. So they got a Duroc pig to see if they could handle a bigger hog. They compared the Durocs and koonies and realized that they had two very different breeds, but both had qualities that would be ideal if they were combined. The Durocs had the size they were looking for, and they grew into that size very quickly, but with that size came rooting and digging. The Durocs damaged their pens, and they weren't trusting of humans at all. Even as a more easygoing pig, Durocs were still strong and willful, and Shelley and Gary had to invest a lot of time into socializing them before they became manageable. The koonies were a little too small and slow-growing, but they were incredibly trusting of humans, quiet and gentle. The koonies were also a foraging pig. They were perfectly happy to feed themselves on pasture, and they did so without rooting and digging up fences and trees. So Shelley set out to combine the two and breed for those positive traits she wanted. In 2007, her 5-year journey began to breed the perfect homestead pig, and no one could have predicted the amazing results. The koonie was the foundation of their new breed. Next came the Berkshire. Berkshires are on the smaller side of a medium pig, but they are also quite friendly. They mother their piglets well, and they have that short snout that is usually a good sign that a pig is more likely to forage if he's left to his own devices. They also didn't take as long to reach maturity as the koonies did. And finally, the Durocs were added to the breeding line. They are, after all, excellent meat pigs, producing some of the best quality meat you could ask for, and they grew much faster, even if they weren't the most even-tempered. They named their final product the Idaho Pasture pig, or IPPs for short. And for the first time in 70 years, a new pig came into existence. IPPs made their grand debut in 2017, and the homesteading community finally had the perfect pig for their small holdings. IPPs are bigger than the tiny koonie, but smaller than the Duroc, just big enough to slaughter at a decent weight, about 200 to 250 pounds. They kept their meat quality, but are able to grow to maturity by eating substantially less grain than pigs normally do. The fact that they are grass-fed makes their meat darker, richer, and sweeter than other breeds of pork. They can rely on about 80% of their feed to come just from grazing. Grazing pigs always supply a good amount of clear and high-quality lard, but they aren't necessarily the best lard pig. It'll be enough to supply a household, but there won't be much more than that to spare. They stand at a height of 35 to 40 inches and can grow to maturity in 6 to 8 months, just about the same as the average meat hog would. IPPs aren't quite as hairy as their koonie grandparents, but they still have a little more hair than pigs usually do, and they can come in just about any color: brown, white, red, black, and spotted. And luckily, they kept the best from the koonies, that upturned snout, gentle natures, and they were just as happy to live off the land, with minimal additional nutrition to feed themselves. And if there's grass and vegetables, the Idahos will stay topside to find their food. They don't root at all unless they really have absolutely nothing left to graze on, and they will dig a little to get to wetter earth to cool down. But all in all, the Idahos are every bit the non-rooting grazers that their koonie relatives are. Sows pick up their littering numbers as they get older, Starting at half a dozen on average for her first farrowing, she'll add a piglet or two every year after that until she reaches 10 to 12 piglets at a time. They are very good mothers, very much like the coonies. They don't get violent or protective when humans handle their babies, and as long as she's separated from the other pig's heavy hooves for the first 6 to 8 weeks, you'll have very good survival rates and live births. They are incredibly hardy and not prone to disease at all. Any animal that is raised outside needs to be kept on a strict deworming schedule to avoid parasites, and then there's the occasional intestinal infection, but no more so than goats or other pigs that are made to be outdoors. Since they come with the coonies' grazing capabilities, they are just so much more economical to raise. Their lack of digging and rooting makes for significantly less maintenance on their pens and fences. As we mentioned before, they can grow to butcher age at around 6 to 8 months. You can have them grow out for a whole year and a half if you really want to get to the absolute highest end of hanging weight. This gives you a little more time to get your affairs in order, and you don't have to rush to process when you aren't adhering to a strict slaughter rotation before they start putting on too much fat. When it comes to butchering them, IPPs have 3 very good meat quantity ancestors to ensure that they have a high-value product to deliver. Berkshire Duroc and coonies might vary greatly in size, but they all produce dark and deeply marbled meat. IPPs are no different. They butcher at half the weight of the Durocs, but that is the perfect size to manage for smaller operations. 200 pounds of pork is nothing to scoff at. That will fill the freezer, and if you have a hog to spare, they can make a good side hustle for you. Their litter sizes and easy farrowing are all very manageable. Some pigs are just too fertile to keep up with when their numbers explode, and they grow out so fast that you just don't have the space to keep them anymore. But 6 to 12 piglets every year can supply you and even your neighbors without the risk of running out of resources. They are very adept at land clearing, and they'll actively seek out edible weeds like dandelion, thistles, and clover. Given that weeds and grasses grow back so quickly, a good rotational schedule that allows a patch to rest for 2 months between returning them will allow for enough time for their main food source to grow back. If you can spare half an acre at a time, they'll keep themselves busy for half the year before you need to move them. Given that they're smaller, they just eat so much less than the bigger hogs. And they take their time with a patch of land, so the rotation isn't nearly as much effort as you'd think. Their sweet natures make for equally good pets as they do production animals. Children won't have a problem taking care of them, and they are the perfect animal to keep when you're new to keeping livestock. You just can't ask for an easier pig or a more gentle one. Cannot stress how cost-effective it is to keep IPPs. The fact that they supplement so heavily on pasture and that you can substitute with garden and table scraps cuts down so much on the cost of keeping hogs that it's almost mind-blowing. And now we get to the downsides of keeping IPPs. Every animal has its pros and cons after all. Firstly, it's a hard concept for people to swallow that they need to run a swine like they would livestock. We've been made used to keeping pigs in pens and feeding them directly from troughs with mostly grains and kitchen scraps. So get that mindset intact before taking on Idahos. The need to fence off a good amount of rotational grazing space is absolutely necessary. That doesn't mean you'll need hundreds of acres to keep them. A dozen IPPs on an acre will do just fine if you fence out enough blocks for them to make their rounds every few months. And if you don't rotate them or think that you're going to try and pen them permanently, they will start rooting. Ruminant animals need to keep their jaws moving constantly, and they just aren't made to be happy with a feeding schedule. Even if they are fed enough to be healthy, they need the same space and the grasses that other grazing animals do. The only real concern when it comes to the grazing fields you've set out for them is that they'll eventually decimate the native weeds. As much as you'd like to get rid of them, they are a nutritional necessity for them, so if your space is smaller and you need to move them more frequently, be sure to throw a handful of seeds and fast-growing grasses at least once a year to ensure that their fodder comes back for them. IPPs will clear out space very well, but the longer grasses and bushes will be too high for their short statures to reach. They prefer to eat with their heads down. If the growth in their next block has gotten too high, give it a mow. They just won't eat anything that's more than 8 inches high, 12 at the very most, and like all pigs, they need a space for cooling, especially because Idahos are a little more hairy and can suffer from the heat. Pigs can't regulate their body temperature, so they will break out to seek shade and moisture if you don't provide it for them. 20% of their feed will need to be made up of grains. Many IPP owners solely run their Idahos just on pasture, and they do perfectly fine. But that added lysine and protein goes a long way to keep them growing at a steady pace, and it enriches the quality of their meat. You can give a little more to sows that have just given birth. They'll appreciate the extra feed after doing all of that hard work. And as strange as this may sound, a lot of IPP owners have problems with butchering them when the time comes. We cannot stress just how sweet and friendly they are. Even the newborn piglets, which are usually super skittish, will crawl onto humans' laps, and the mothers don't mind you handling their babies either. Boars are so chilled that they don't fight or push. They just want scratches and attention, and they are wicked smart. Idahos will memorize your schedule and habits, and they'll remind you of feedings and expect your presence when they know you usually come by at certain times of the day. Just like a dog gets excited to see you when you get home from work, these pigs will line up to greet and cuddle you. They genuinely love their human handlers, and you can understand why it's so easy to become too attached to them. Finally, Idaho pasture pigs are not a large-scale farming pig. They don't do well when they're cramped up against each other in small pens or inside holding structures. They won't be as healthy or as productive if they're kept on grains alone. You'll have a very miserable and sickly pig if you expect them to live like other pigs do. And under that indoor stress, boars won't mate, and sows are likely to just not go into heat at all. IPPs are the perfect pig for the small holding and the homestead, and they can offer a good supplementary income for you, but they just aren't capable of keeping up with the factory breeds. All in all, the Farris has bred the absolute dream homestead hog. No wonder they're so popular. In the 21 years since they came onto the scene, you can find them all over the USA, and by the rate that their populations are expanding, it won't be long before they make their hooves to the rest of the world too. Right now, they aren't exactly expensive like show pigs or rare breeds are, but they will fetch a slightly higher price than their more common contenders. But give it a few more years, it won't be long before every small-acre farm has them up for sale. Shelley and Gary Farris redefined what hog rearing on the homestead should look like. They bring everything that a pig should bring: meat, good fertility, and easy to handle. But they come with so much more than that, friendly and quiet, and just so much cheaper and low maintenance than any other pig can dream of being. Idaho pasture pigs are here to stay, and we're thrilled to see them flourishing in such a short space of time. Do you have Idaho pasture pigs right now, or are you looking for a new hog for the homestead? If you've had them before, let us know what your experiences were like. And if you're still thinking of getting them, we hope that this video helped you make the leap to getting IPPs. They are truly the best pig for the small farm. If you like this video, have a look at some of our other uploads on your screen right now. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos on the fascinating world of livestock breeds that are waiting to find a home on your acreage. Until next time, remember, there's no limit to what your land can achieve if you're always adapting and learning.